The first distinctive features of Renaissance culture appeared in Spain in the second half of the 15th century. The influence of the Catholic Church and persistent church control kept back the development of a secular trend in art. Gothic positions were especially strong in Spain. In spite of the unification of the country, fulfilled thanks to the marriage of the Catholic rulers, the Castilian Queen Isabella and Fernando, the King of Aragon, which took place in 1479, and the successful finishing of the Reconquista in 1492, various parts of Spain, divided by high mountain ranges from each other, continued to follow their local artistic traditions. The eastern provinces of Spain, Valencia, Catalonia, Aragon, were under the constant influence of Italian art. In the works of these local schools of painting, all personages are endowed with a monumentalism, which we feel in the Hermitage painting from the hand of an unknown master, Saint Sebastian and Saint Fabian. Saint Fabian was a Christian martyr who was executed in the 3rd century under Emperor Decce. He is represented in the papal tiara, as he had been elected Pope of Rome. Saint Sebastian, according to Spanish legend, is depicted as an archer. Such a conjuncture of two personages, a clergyman and a warrior, two chief participants of the Reconquista, in one picture, was understood by contemporary viewers as a declaration of the victory over the Muslims. Castilian art tended toward northern art, thanks to the personal tastes of Queen Isabella. Narrative subjects were especially popular here. A characteristic feature was also the wide use of landscape and architectural motifs in the rendering of background, as we can see in the painting by an unknown master, The Entombment of Christ. The painter carried on the tradition of medieval art in representing the figures of a different scale: the oversized figure of Christ, the smaller ones of other holy personages, and the smallest one of the donator. The color scheme and landscape details are charged with a specific symbolic meaning. Instead of Jerusalem, the cathedral of the Spanish town of Zamora is represented in the background. There is another version of this painting, commissioned by the same family, as an armorial bearings shows, but by a woman. Spanish religious paintings in the 15th, 16th centuries were intended primarily for the so-called retablos, altar pieces in the big cathedrals. The Hermitage painting with the entombment was also a part of a retablo. Probably it was added to some finished composition, which is why the panel lost a fragment.
Saint Fabian was a Christian martyr who was executed in the 3rd century under Emperor Decce. He is shown here in the papal tiara, for he had been elected Pope of Rome. Saint Sebastian, according to a Spanish legend, is depicted as an archer, the conjuncture of two personages, a clergyman and a warrior, two chief participants of the Reconquista, in one painting, was understood by contemporary viewers as a declaration of victory over the Muslims. The artist carried on the tradition of medieval art when representing figures of a different scale: too big a figure of Christ, smaller ones of other holy personages, and the smallest one of the donator. The color distribution and landscape details are charged with symbolic meaning. Instead of Jerusalem, the cathedral of the Spanish town of Zamora is represented in the background. The male faces distinguish themselves by real expressiveness, while the treatment of sorrow in the female's body and gestures is still conventional. There is another version of this painting, commissioned by a woman of the same family, as an armorial bearing shows.
The stormy spiritual atmosphere of that time was reflected in the work of El Greco, too. His painting, The Apostles, St. Peter and St. Paul, foreshadows or even begins his famous series, Apostolados, with a representation of Christ and the 12 apostles. The motif of the distinctive conflict between the two apostles, depicted by the painter, was based on the text of the New Testament, to wit, of the letters to the Galatians, where the conflict was described between Paul and Peter, which took place in Antioch. The major personage is here Paul, with his resolute and purposeful appearance, while the Christian church always accentuated the spiritual superiority of the apostle Peter. The elongated proportions, the somber color scheme with nervous splashes of contrasting tones, reflected the passionate emotionality characteristic of the pictorial system of El Greco. In the features of Paul, one can discern a self-portrait of the painter himself. The Greek artist Domenichos Theotokopoulos, who was born in Crete and called El Greco in Spain, became thus the most Spanish of its painters. The golden age of the Spanish school began with the paintings of Giuseppe de Ribera. He was born in Valencia, worked mainly in Rome and in Naples, which was a part of Spain at that time. Ribera was court painter to the vice-kings of Naples. Nevertheless, his art was not court art at all. He painted from nature, poor men of Naples and nearby villages, turning them into holy personages such as martyrs, philosophers, and saints. In the painting, Saint Jerome Listening to the Trumpet, he represented even this visionary scene as a purely earthly event. All the forms are imbued with the truth of life. The emaciated old body of Saint Jerome, as well as the young angel who performs his trumpeting with great zeal. A lion's head near the hermit calls to mind the episode of Saint Jerome's legend when he healed the beast's paw by pulling out a splinter from it. In the painting Saint Onofrius, the warm color scheme gave way to the silver tonality of the color palette. The spiritual element vanquished the feeble body. According to legend, Saint Onofrius rejected his right to succeed the royal throne and spent 60 years as a hermit in complete isolation. Saint Sebastian and Saint Irene is one of the most harmonious paintings in the early work of Ribera. The subject was based on a legend. Saint Irene and her servant came at night after Sebastian's martyrdom to bury him secretly, but knew that he was still alive. They saved him by healing his wounds and taking care of him. Adoration of the beautiful nude body was bitterly reproached in Catholic Spain, and mythological motifs were not widespread. The works of Ribera allowed people to become acquainted with Italian tradition. His paintings were well known in Spain. He became an object of national pride as the first painter of the Spanish school who was renowned not only in Spain, but abroad too. Seville gave to the world painting from such ingenious masters as Diego Velázquez. He was a direct contemporary of Zurbaran, being only 1 year younger than the latter. Probably at an early age, Velázquez met him in the studio of his teacher, Francisco Pacheco. In his genre paintings, such as the Hermitage's The Lunch, we can see the ordinary personages of the common people of Seville. In Spain, these paintings were called bodegones, from the word bodega, or tavern, the wine shop. The personages of this painting are apparently free in expressing their good humor, but sitting around the tavern table, they retain the sense of self-respect so characteristic of every Spaniard. The faces were obviously painted from life. In the youth on the right, one can discern a self-portrait of the artist himself. Velázquez was well acquainted with the pictorial system of Caravaggio. In this painting, the dominant tone is brown. The outlines are still rigid and sharply drawn. All the details are rendered very accurately. The choice of the still life objects, bread, wine, fish, and a pomegranate, call to mind the symbolic meaning of the Holy Communion. One can feel the aura of some majestic event, as if it was something more than a simple wine shop scene. The portrait of Olivares was painted after Velázquez moved to Madrid. As court painter to King Philip II, he was obliged to paint the portraits of the monarch himself, his family, and of course the king's favorite, the omnipotent Count and Duke Olivares. Olivares bears a mask of a cool impenetrability. Nevertheless, this hero, though powerful, is near to his downfall. The Hermitage portrait was painted at a time when his political activities brought him to the verge of disgrace. The restrained color scheme is deluding, since a closer look at Velázquez's surface texture reveals a great number of subtle shades. In the second half of the 17th century, another artistic star appeared in Seville, Bartolomé Esteban Murillo, who ranks as the last master of the golden age of Spanish painting. His painting, Boy with a Dog, continued the traditions of the national genre painting. But Murillo's treatment of the child image is more lyrical than it was in the paintings of his predecessors. The viewer feels attracted by the amusing scene. This boy is obviously poor, his basket is empty, and he cannot share anything with a street dog. But he is happy, and his smile is bright. He is a true Spaniard, a child of Seville, and does not look for any pity. One of the most interesting paintings from the hand of Murillo is his painting, Isaac Blesses Jacob. It belongs to his series dedicated to Jacob's life, and 2 paintings from this series are in the Hermitage. The subject, taken from the Old Testament, was treated as a genre scene. We can see Jacob, a younger son, who thanks his mother Rebekah, who deceived his blind father in order to receive his blessing. The landscape surrounding this scene is remarkable in its beauty. It also fulfills the function of unification, combining the hills in the distance and Jacob's house in the foreground. It is the landscape that determines the emotional structure of this painting. The image of the Virgin became one of the central motifs in Murillo's work. Mary was declared the patroness of Spain and was considered the embodiment of piety and compassion. More than once, Murillo painted the subject, the Immaculate Conception. The most famous images of the Virgin were made by Murillo in the last period of his work. He took her features from the actual women of Andalusia, and thus glorified their beauty. The subtlety of his pictorial approach gave the name aerial, vaporoso, to that period of his work. In the Hermitage painting, Mary is turned toward the divine light, The artist followed the canon of the Immaculate Conception when representing Mary as a young girl, aged between 12 and 13.
There are some personages round the table of the tavern, bodega. They are not bound by any court restrictions and express quite openly their good humor, though retaining a sense of self-respect. The faces are obviously individual, and the youth to the right seems to be a self-portrait of the artist himself. The artist displayed his deep insight into the contradictory nature of the omnipotent favorite of the King Philippe IV. Olivares wears a mask of cool impenetrability, which is accompanied by the restrained color scheme of the painting. Black became the chief color at the Spanish court of the time. According to his order, taking into consideration the prosperity of the country, all expensive fabrics were prohibited, and sumptuous collars gave way to small and modest ones. There is something miraculous in the unruffled calm of the woman, as well as in her restrained gesture. The filigree design of the lace collar and the distinctive ornaments of the golden embroidery emphasize the refined dark colors of the clothes. The posture and gesture of Don Diego seemed to be bound by his splendid armor. The ceremonial portrait emphasized the high social position of the subject, but the treatment of his face is extremely faithful. The face of an old man behind the Virgin, as well as the division of the pictorial space into earthly and celestial parts, recalls the artistic formulas characteristic of El Greco. Being nevertheless a representative of a new generation in Spanish art, Maino attended only to the actual faithfulness of the subject's treatment. Everyday objects of each Spanish household are like the symbols of the future torments of Christ, a spindle and a spinning wheel, which compose a shape of a cross. The Virgin's image is endowed with a tragic feeling, as if it reflected the thoughts of the artist himself. The boy is happy and his smile is bright, in spite of his empty basket and absence of anything he can share with the street dog. He is a Spaniard, a child of Seville, and does not look for pity. The subject, taken from the Old Testament, was treated as a genre scene. We can see Jacob, a younger son, who thanks his mother, Rebekah, who deceived his blind father in order to receive his blessing. The landscape surrounding this scene is remarkable in its beauty. In his late period, Murillo painted his most famous images of the Virgin. He took her features from the actual women of Andalusia and thus glorified their beauty. The subtlety of his pictorial means gave the name to that period of his work, aerial, vaporoso. As a rule in Spanish still life pieces, everyday objects are imbued with an unruffled calm and majesty. Their arrangement allowed them to be seen clearly with all the peculiarity of their forms and joyful coloring. The realistic art of Spain of the 17th century was widely based on the traditions of folk art as well as on the mentality of simple people. Thus, the scene of the Vision itself was handled here like a purely earthly event. This truthfulness to life was punctuated with emphasis of the emaciated old body of Saint Jerome and with the zeal of the trumpeting angel. There is a lion near the hermit which calls to mind the episode of Saint Jerome's legend when he healed the beast's paw by pulling a splinter from it. This is one of the most poetic paintings in Ribera's work. Saint Irene and her servant came at night after Sebastian's martyrdom to bury him secretly, but knowing that he was still alive, they saved him by healing his wounds and caring for him. The legend describes the death of this martyr who was burnt on the grating. The painter rendered Saint Laurentius, the first deacon of the Church of Rome, as a hero, recalling human steadfastness and fortitude. The children's images painted by Zurbarán are always imbued with an earthly warmth, a lyricism without any sentimentality. Mary is represented here as a small girl who offers prayers with a moving and spontaneous earnestness. This image is both very earthly, which is strengthened by the characteristically Spanish ornamental dress border, and important in its deep feeling. The art of El Greco reflects the stormy spiritual atmosphere of the time. The actual hero of this painting is the Apostle Paul, with his resolute and purposeful appearance. While the Christian Church always accentuated the spiritual superiority of the Apostle Peter, it has been supposed by investigators of El Greco's work that the face of the Apostle Paul is a self-portrait. The elongated proportions and the somber color scheme with nervous splashes of contrasting tones are used to strengthen the passionate emotionality of the painting.
The work of Goya belonged to the 18th century as much as to the 19th. His highly original talent made him an outstanding master of world art. I had 3 teachers: Life, Velázquez, and Rembrandt. These words of the painter are applicable to the portrait of the actress Antonia Sarate. Goya enriched the lessons of his teachers with passionate and mobile emotionalism. The portrait preserved forever the name and appearance of the actress Antonia Sarate. Her beauty is noble and delicate. We can quite clearly suppose that its soul was equally subtle and delicate. Her big dark eyes are imbued with inner fire and sadness. This portrait can be considered as one of the first images of Romanticism, a portrait of a mood.
These vases are characteristic of the Castilian applied art of the 17th and 18th centuries. The complicated forms shown here appeared in the 17th century. The main part of a vessel could be of different forms, round, oval, and others, but the obligatory elements are 2 vertical spouts for pouring and drinking water. Such multi-handled vases were very common in the south of Spain. The whimsical form of Andalusian applied art was influenced by medieval Moslem art. Once Goya said he had three teachers: life, Velázquez, and Rembrandt. All these lessons are present in the portrait of the actress Antonia Serrate, whose image is noble, psychologically deep, and full of life. Goya's particular thrilling of emotions and passionate flickering of light, handled by his brush and color manner, are to be considered as a foretoken of the near Romanticism.